Hello everyone and welcome to a game that finished only a few seconds ago, and I am very excited to show it to you. It is Magnus Carlsen versus Niels Grandelius from round 3 of this year's GRENKE Freestyle Chess Open. The game has it all, not just good moves on the board, but also psychological warfare, and it's everything you would expect from a chess game if, let's say, they were trying to make a movie about a chess game. So let's check it out and see what I mean by this. I'll make it 2 or maybe even 3 pause the video moments depending on how it goes or how long the video will be, but it's one of those games. I can make it a 10-minute video, I can make it a 40-minute video because the variations are insane, and I've only selected 2 really big ones, so, you know, hope it will be okay for you guys. So let's check it out. Magnus with white opens with pawn to h4, which is very nice. He opens up the rook on h1. You can see that the position is pretty interesting. Queen on a1, then the knight pair, the bishop pair, and the king between the two towers. Niels replies with pawn to e5. Here, it's not like when there's a g4, g5 action where you can immediately challenge it with h4, so maybe, you know, you don't play pawn to g5. Here, going pawn to h5 is perfectly fine, and if Niels wants to keep it symmetrical, he can definitely do it. But here he goes pawn to e5, Magnus grabs more space with pawn to h5, pawn to h6, stopping, as you know, that Magnus would just push that pawn to h6 on the next move, and Magnus strikes with pawn to b4, as he does in pretty much every game. And here you can see that, you know, you guys are always laughing at me when I say how b4 is a powerful move. Magnus plays it pretty much in every game in the opening here in Chess 960, and he would in regular chess as well if theory wasn't so far advanced and players knew how to defend against it. But, you know, if your opponent isn't a 27 plus grandmaster, b4 is a spectacular move in any position. Pawn to d6 and pawn to a4 by Magnus, just grabbing more space. And none of them know theory about this particular position, so controlling more space is definitely the way to go. Knight to d7, we have pawn to c4, Magnus grabs more space, and now pawn to f5. And I think here he sort of said, all right, let's not make a mockery of the game. We're not going to play d4 as well, even though d4 is the top move recommended by the engine. But Magnus plays knight to c3, and now Niels says, all right, I'm just going to play bishop to f7, and now you're kind of paying for not playing pawn to d4, because I'm threatening bishop captures on c4, and you have to defend by either bishop to b3 or pawn to d3, but you still can play d4 as the queen is no longer guarding d4. So, okay, Magnus plays d3, defends the c4 pawn, c6, and pawn to e3. We have pawn to a5 by Niels, and Magnus advances the pawn all the way to b5. We have bishop to b6, makes sense, as the king is still on g1. And even though, okay, you're probably thinking this rook moves, we're gonna castle king side, it's also possible that all of the pieces move and then players just decide to castle queen side. So you have to account for that as well. Bishop to e2, we have knight to e7, and knight to b3. We have knight to c5. You could also maybe just continue with something like rook to e8 or queen to a7, because, you know, queen to a7 will be a useful move. Niels goes for knight to c5, and Magnus trades. Knight captures, bishop captures, and now Magnus plays queen to d1. He says, I want to get d4 in, and Niels says, nope, that's not happening, just queen to a7. Magnus plays rook to h4, gains more control over the d4 square, and Niels plays bishop to b6. And the question is, should you strike with the d4 right away, or do you wait for Niels to maybe log the position? If he plays something like c5, then maybe d4 will never be an option. So Magnus strikes right away. Pawn to d4, we have rook to d8, nicely aligning the rook with the white queen, and Magnus just opens the position up. D captures on e5, D captures on e5, and queen to c2. Niels castles kingside, and Magnus goes knight to b1. And this is a very interesting position, because looking at Magnus's king and rook, you'd think that, okay, Magnus already castled, but not really. This rook just left the h1 square, and if Magnus moves the bishop, he can still castle queenside, because the king and rook have not been moved. So okay, Niels strikes with pawn to f4, and it's really a powerful move, very, very active one. Point being that if Magnus captures on f4, Niels would just go for full activity mode. Bishop to e6, and after f captures on e5, he would go knight to f5, and he has fully mobilized his forces. Not easy for Magnus to even make a move in this position. So Magnus thought about this for not a lot, maybe a minute and a half, and he just played pawn to e4, which, okay, doesn't give Niels the active position that he wanted, but it also gives up the d4 square. So that means if Niels can somehow get this knight to d4, that would be hell for Magnus. The problem for Niels is that it's not that easy to get that knight to d4. Obviously, you cannot go here, you cannot go here, you cannot go to f5. You can go to e6, but first you have to get to e6. So Niels goes bishop to d4. He wants to play c5 and really cement that bishop on d4, which means that the queen will no longer be helping out on this diagonal, but maybe it's no longer even necessary. We have knight to d2 by Magnus and pawn to c5. We have knight to f3 and pawn to b6. Okay. Very nicely played. We have bishop to c3, Magnus putting pressure on that bishop on d4, and queen to c7. We have rook to c1. If the bishop get traded off, then you also want the c4 pawn sufficiently defended. And Niels could play something like rook to c8, sort of a waiting move, or just adding more pressure on the c-file. But he now wants a full point against Magnus. He plays pawn to g5. He goes after Magnus's king, and also the rook. So Magnus has to react to this. He plays h captures on g6. Knight captures on g6, and now Magnus has to figure out why Niels offered the h6 pawn. Well, if Magnus captures, Niels gets to play king to g7 with tempo, and then the rooks go to the h-file, and could be very, very unpleasant for Magnus's king. So Magnus just plays rook to h5. He says, I'm not touching the h6 pawn. Niels goes king to g7, adds, well, now a defender, so you no longer have to worry about it. And Magnus plays bishop captures on d4. We have e captures on d4, and now pawn to e5. And this is where not only, as Bobby Fischer said, that all that matters on the board is good moves, here something more than good moves is needed to win the game, and you'll see what I mean by this. Niels played knight to e7. Which is an okay move. It's just not the best, and probably why Niels was interested in getting a draw in this position. He put pressure on the rook on h5, and he thought, okay, we're settling for a repetition. Just a quick detour to show you what maybe can be achieved with this position. You can go rook d to e8. You can put triple pressure on this e5 pawn, and once you defend it with queen to e4, because there's no other way to defend the pawn, you're gonna go knight h8, attack the rook, and once the rook moves, you're gonna play bishop to g6. Now, rook captures on f8. Of course, you would very much love to give up the queen for two rooks, but black will not allow it. Rook captures on f8, and now there's, well, only one good move for white, and that is knight captures on d4, saying that, okay, I will give you the knight for two central pawns, or if you capture with the bishop, I get knight e6 check-in, and I pick up the queen on c7. So best for black would be to play queen to d7, and then we get some sort of a crazy position like e6, then queens get traded off, captures, and then after c captures on d4, something like c5, and after b captures, rook captures, white has two passed pawns, black is up a knight, so it's a crazy position. All in all, black is the one who will be pushing for a win if played precisely. But you have to see all of that, and you really have to, want to win a game against Magnus. Niels played knight to e7, which puts pressure on the rook, and this is what I meant by supreme psychological warfare. Magnus played rook to h4. And okay, not much to be said about this. He gets the rook out of the way, and he puts pressure on f4. So Niels repeats knight to g6, and Magnus repeats rook to h5. Niels repeats knight to e7, and Magnus now plays rook to h1. And okay, it would seem like maybe Magnus does not want a repetition. Maybe he just played a rook to h1, but he tricked Niels. Now Niels has to go the other way around. He has to play rook d to e8, or bishop to g6, or queen to c8. Anything but the move he played in the game. He thought maybe, okay, I go knight back to g6. Magnus will repeat rook to h5. and you know, we get a draw. It's a threefold repetition, and that's it. But after rook to h1 and knight to g6, the position is now completely winning for Magnus due to the rook being on h1 and not being on pre, so to say. Feel free to pause the video and win the game for Magnus. Magnus took 8 minutes in this position to play this move. I will give you guys a couple of seconds, but you know it's there. Magnus didn't know it's there, so have at it. The move in question is queen to f5, and it's a sensational move. Queen to e4 not as potent, as you don't have access to h5 and then going after the h6 pawn, but this is the idea. You want to have bishop to d3 ready, but you also want to have queen h5 ready, because probably Niels thought that queen to f5 was never an option due to bishop captures on c4, opening up an attack towards the queen. But there's nothing that you can play here. And before the video, I told you that we're going to explore two maybe larger lines. So I guess this could be one of them. I will show you the best way to defend, just to show you how hopeless the position is. Even with best defense, which is queen to e7, which sort of allows you to defend the center and also to get your rook over to h8. Queen h5, attack the h6 pawn, rook to h8, and bishop to d3. You will play queen to e8, and now after rook to e1, preparing pawn to e6, you will play bishop to e6. So now everything is defended. The problem, however, is knight to h4. Now the knight is attacked 3 times, and once you capture, queen captures, and queen to f7, it seems like everything is perfectly fine. But here comes the move that you wouldn't find if I gave you 1,000 days, you know. I could give you I'm not going to say eternity, but you know, you simply do not find this move. Bishop to h7. Look at this disgusting move. The threat, of course, queen captures on h6, checkmate. Now that the rook no longer defends the h6 pawn, if rook captures bishop, then the rook on d8 is undefended, and if king captures, then the rook again no longer defends the h6 pawn, and queen captures on h6 just ends the game. So that's with best possible defense, just to show you what kind of a crazy position it is. So it's hard to say. Probably Magnus figured all of this out within those 8 minutes that he took while you guys were pausing the video. But you know, who knows? In the end, Niels played bishop captures on c5 on c4. He had 5 minutes to figure this out. He spent 3.5 calculating. So you know, he had to play something. And Magnus now plays queen h5, attacks the pawn here, and rook to h8 doesn't do all that much because the bishop is hanging now. So you're just going to be up a full bishop without any compensation. But Niels finds a brilliant way to continue the struggle. Bishop captures on e2. And okay, Magnus plays queen captures on h6, king to g8, queen captures on g6, and queen to g7. And now the question is, how do you win this? There's only one way to do it. I'm going to show you what Magnus played the next move, not to make it too complicated. Magnus gave a check, queen to e6 with check, and now you have to decide how to defend. You can go queen f7 or rook f7. Queen f7, there's a problem because queen captures on b6, and well, not much to be played here. If bishop captures on f3, g captures on f3, you just don't have a good follow-up. You're going to move the king. Even if check, you just move the king. Rook to g1 is coming. So it's not much to look for. So instead, rook to f7 was played, and now Magnus has to figure out how to win this. But I'm pretty sure you guys can see this one without even pausing the video, because you guys are amazing players. Here, Magnus played rook to h6. It is the only move that wins the game, and this is the one that Magnus played. We can give it, you know, oops, not that, sorry about that. I was going to give it 2 exclamation marks. That bishop to h7 move that we discussed, that would deserve like 3 exclamation marks. But okay, the interface does not offer that. So rook h6, and the threat is rook to g6. You win the queen, obviously, you win the game. But Niels finds a way to fight. Bishop to d3. Okay, he guards the g6 square, and now queen captures on b6, just threatening the rook, so you're not in time to do anything really other than react to that. Rook d to f8, and now Magnus plays rook captures on c5. He just, you know, picks up a pawn because there's nothing to worry about here. We have bishop to e4, now threatening bishop captures knight because the g pawn is pinned. and you have to be very, very careful here. Again, it's very easy to mess up with pawn to e6. If you play pawn to e6, all of a sudden rook b7. And what do you play now? There's not much, because rook g6 is no longer an option, and it wasn't, I mean, as the bishop is guarding, but now even the queen got disconnected, and the rook is hanging as well. So queen captures on b7 has to be played, and after bishop captures, you will play rook to g5. Okay, you win back the queen, but, you know, you will not get more than a draw. Let's say bishop captures on f3, rook captures on g7, king captures, even e7 can be played, something like rook e8, rook to d6, but you know, the bishop will survive, and with rook captures on d4, black is up a piece, but white is up many pawns, so all in all, will be a draw. So very, very easy to mess up the position, but Magnus plays, well, the perfect move. He plays rook c to c6, seemingly offering a rook, but not really, as that bishop is stuck guarding the g6 square. And we reach the position where everything is going after that g6 square. So rook to g6 can even be played here with the deadly effect. And there's not much you can do about it. Rook to b7 is played, but now Magnus just plays queen captures on d4. Again, Magnus plays these threats, and you know, his opponent has to worry about his queen, his king, and Magnus just keeps collecting pawns. It's a very, very unpleasant experience, I'm sure, for Niels. Bishop captures on c6. Now, it can be played, and it's even the best move, but now Magnus just goes queen to c4 with check. Of course, you cannot recapture with the pawn, as the rook here is also hanging, and you could recapture with the rook, but it's not the best. Queen to c4 check is the best, because you want to get your queen here and keep the threat of rook to g6 alive. So queen to f7, blocking, and now pawn to e6, chasing the queen away and threatening a nice discovery once this pawn reaches the e7 square. Queen to g7, pawn to e7 with check, rook to f7, not giving up the rook with check, and now comes queen captures on c6, again threatening rook to g6, just winning the queen. And that's pretty much it. You cannot capture the pawn, otherwise rook g6 wins, so Niels tries queen to a1 with check, king to h2, and now rook b captures on e7, queen to c8 check by Magnus, rook to f8, and queen to g4 with check. You still have to be very, very precise here. You can easily blunder your queen or even checkmate with white. Rook to g7, and now queen to e6 check by Magnus, rook f to f7, and now finally knight to e5, going after the rook. And here Magnus had to calculate a little bit if Niels had this rook captures on g2 check, and he almost does. I mean, I'm just gonna have to show it to you. If he goes for this, Magnus had to figure out all of this. King captures on g2, f3 check, king h3, queen to h1 with check, king g4, queen g2 check, king to h5, queen to h2 check, king to g6, now attacking the pinned piece with the king, and if queen to g2 check, now you can finally block with knight to g4, and that's it. You can even play queen captures on g4 check, because you will win the white queen after this check. The problem is king h5, and the queen is defended. Captures, and you end up a full rook. So, I mean, crazy stuff. So after knight e5, pawn to f3 was played. Niels hoping for just one mistake for Magnus this game. Should Magnus rush it with knight captures on f7, then Niels can just deliver checkmate with rook captures on g2 check and queen to h1 checkmate. But after f3, Magnus just played knight to g6, and he was in this position on move 50 that Niels Grandelius resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. There are no checks, there are no tricks. Rook to h8 checkmate is coming, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about this. If you trade, for example, rook captures, king to f8, you're just gonna deliver. Well, we can even show it. Queen to c8 with check, king to e7, and rook to e6 will be checkmate. So that is not an option. Other thing you can do is play. You cannot move the rook. You can play queen back to g7, but that's pretty much self-explanatory. You pick up the queen, and of course you win the game easily. So yeah, other than that, not much to be done here. Rook h7 can also be played, but that runs into queen to e8 with check, and after king g7, rook captures, and after king captures, queen captures on f7, and okay, you're up a whole knight. Even though queen g7 can block, you can trade, for example, captures, the knight will move, or you can just advance the pawn to victory. You don't really care. There's nothing black can do here. So insane game, really impressive stuff by both of them. But yeah, it all came down to this point where I believe Niels was thinking that Magnus was trying to go for a repetition here. Once rook h4 was played, knight g6, rook h5, knight e7, and Magnus played rook to h1. Niels probably thought, okay, knight g6, Magnus repeats, and we go, it's going to be a repetition. But no, rook h1 was pure psychological warfare from Magnus. He tricked Niels. Niels played knight back to g6, and Magnus just won the game brilliantly with this queen to f5 move. You could just see it. He sort of became like a stone. He went full calculation mode. He calculated, played queen f5, and it just started flowing from him. It was beautiful. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Brilliant stuff by both of them, but Magnus wins this one. He's now on 3 out of 3, and he is the only one from the elite players who is winning all of them. On other boards, it's not like that. Fabiano lost on board 2 versus Etienne Bacro. Yanni Pomnic lost on board 3 against Leon-Luc Mendonça. Wesley So lost on board 4 versus Dmitry Kolars, and so on and so on. A lot of draws, and the current standings are on 3 points. Okay, we actually have a lot of people on 3 points. Etienne Bacro, Yuan Gui, Ralf Mamedov, Magnus Carlsen, Richard Rapport, Jan Smits, Juraj Druška, Viktor Mika, not really sure who, Viktor Mihalevsky, Alexis Sarana, Jordan Van Forest, Joao Kirsindarov, Dmitry Kolars, Leon-Luc Mendonça, as we've said, Pranesh, and those are the 3-pointers. Everything else is 2.5 points. So yeah, crazy stuff. Very much looking forward to the other days, because there will be two classical games being played every day. So it's insane. I mean, that's a crazy tempo. I don't know if you guys ever tried it. I tried it a couple of years. We played in the Croatian second league, and there we had to play two classical games a day on a Sunday, and it's just brutal. I don't think that's normal, but yeah, okay, these guys are paid for it, so I guess it's fine. Yeah, okay. It's not easy. It's very tiring, and Magnus winning like this, it's absolutely even more amazing. So I hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Derek King, Charles Benjamin Flynn, Diane Schwartz, Ilya Maltsev, and Mohammed Babar Khalil for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And sorry for a bit of a longer video, but you've seen the lines. See you soon.